Is it just me, or did everything seem to be hunky-dory and relatively sweet, despite our problems in Manchester with that shop on King Street and the protests outside, and then suddenly one ghastly attack in Paris, and we now hear that only something like 58% of Manchester of Britain's Jews now feel quite safe in our own country. And it takes the Home Secretary yesterday to announce that she really does hope that Jews don't flee our nation. Well, I'm glad to say that Mark Gardner of the Community Security Trust, the CST, those guys you see helping us outside synagogues and schools. Mark Gardner, you're on the line from London. Thank you for joining us tonight here on Salford City Radio.
My pleasure.
Mark, is that a fair analysis, that things seem to be relatively calm and sweet for Britain's Jews, and suddenly overnight we're considering our positions and frightened?
I've not heard it put like that, but I have to be honest, it made me smile.
It made you smile?
It really did.
Go on, tell us more.
It made me smile. What you said initially, that we all got on with our lives after the pressures of the summer.
Yes.
There are these pockets of harassment and tension and anxiety, like around the Kerem shop in Manchester, but for most of us, most of the time, everything is good. Was it hunky-dory that you said? And then this terrible event happens in Paris, and that's when we stop smiling.
Well,
and all of a sudden, the fear kicks in, and I think that's entirely understandable.
I think it's also understandable because, if anything, the politicians are fueling that fear, aren't they, Mark Gardner? For example, the British Prime Minister has convened a meeting of 20 nations, a high security conference for this week, I think. So, and Mrs May suddenly goes public and says, please don't leave, we think you're great. So that's jolly good reason, isn't it, for Jews to start, if not panicking, to be seriously considering their positions in a country which is seeming to have increasing problems for Jews.
I think it's unfair to say that the politicians speaking out plainly, saying that they want to address the problem, are somehow or other fueling the problem. I think that's really unfair. These current headlines, we've moved now from the Paris attacks into discussing the survey that was put out by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism group.
Yes.
So now we're talking about headlines that are shaped by the questions that were asked by that group, which is why the politicians' replies are phrased in the way that they are now phrased. I don't think the survey itself was that great. I think there have been other surveys that have been done that showed significantly different results that I think were a good deal more accurate. And I think that the survey, for instance, that the Jewish Chronicle did last week, which did not get media headlines because it wasn't that dramatic, is actually far closer to the truth.
That's, I think the Jewish Chronicle was saying, they had a headline, "We're staying put, say 9 out of 10.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know, the Jewish Chronicle were stung a little bit because in the summer, I don't know if you remember, they conducted basically a street poll. They literally went out in the street and spoke to people. It was a pretty unscientific way of doing business, and the headline that they had then was, I think it was something like 60-odd% of people were fearful for the future. And there was a bit of a backlash, and they've really gone a long way now to trying to put together a proper, regular survey group as scientifically as possible. And I think we should be grateful for that, just as we should be for the work that Jewish Policy Research does. Similarly, with these really proper surveys, it's such a serious subject, and it makes people so upset to see those headlines that when you enter into this subject area, you have to do so with the utmost seriousness and rigour.
Now, the CST receives government funding, and I was reading that you've installed, since in the last 5 or 6 years, more than 2,000 CCTV cameras and 96 security doors to help protect Jews in places of Jewish resort. What else if anything, do you think should or could the CST be doing, Mark Gardner?
Well, we're limited, obviously, by the resources that we have, and we're a charity. So we can only do what the community gives us the finance to do. We rely upon our volunteers, so we can only do according to how many people come forward to help us in the work. And everything that we do relies upon the cooperation of the community, because we're not the police and nobody's forced to work with us in any way at all. We get amazing cooperation from across the community, and we've got thousands of really hard-working volunteers and people doing security rotas, and it's brave and it's selfless of these people to do that work. We're always asking what more we can do. Of course we are. And just to clarify, the government doesn't pay us. We administer money on behalf of the government that goes to pay for the security guards at Jewish schools.
And I know members of my own family are members of CST, and we're very grateful, and I should pay tribute to them, Mark Gardner. To what extent, though, just after the attacks in Paris, I took a bicycle ride around main Jewish areas of North Manchester. I saw no evidence of any police whatsoever. I saw minimal, probably low-paid security guards outside some of the schools. The boss of one of the bakeries told me there'd been a rash of police officers and CST workers outside his shop the day after the attacks in Paris, or the morning of the attacks in Paris, but nothing since. Can you comment on the level of security that's now being provided either by the police or by yourselves, and in Greater Manchester in particular, Mark?
I think that if you go out now and speak to the shopkeepers or people in the streets, that they should have seen a CST presence, foot patrols, and they should also have seen a policing presence. The police reassessed the risk towards the community during last week, and that is the necessary prerequisite for them to actually deliver significantly increased levels of policing. But I know that our Manchester office has worked tirelessly in North Manchester, going out on foot patrols, where basically previously we wouldn't have done, because we work usually, as you know, in and around community buildings rather than simply in streets that have got lots of Jewish premises in them.
We spoke before of surveys done by Jewish organisations. YouGov had a result of a rather worrying result of a poll that they'd taken among non-Jewish attitudes to Jews. Do you want to comment on that, Mark Gardner, from the CST? That was pretty...
Yeah, of course. I think there are some really interesting things in that YouGov part of the survey, and in many ways they actually echo previous surveys that have been done by the Anti-Defamation League and also by the highly respected Pew Global Attitudes Survey. But unfortunately, the way that the figures were then presented were not similar to those other surveys. Basically, those other surveys say that you have to answer yes to however many questions before you would then be assumed to have some kind of anti-Semitic prejudice. Whereas the way that this one was presented, it wasn't done in that manner. There are things in there also that we could discuss. For example, is it or is it not anti-Semitic to say that you would rather that your child didn't marry a Jew? I know plenty of Jews who say that they'd rather their children didn't marry a non-Jew. Does that make them racist? Similarly, the question about, for example, and this is a really interesting one, the question about, are Jews somehow or other also loyal to Israel,
yes,
as well as to Britain?
Yes.
Very interestingly, the number of people in London who answered yes to that question was significantly higher than the number of people outside London who answered yes to that question. Now, guesswork here, but why would the difference be in London to other places? And why would the answer be yes, so much more so in London? Basically because so many people in London come from other parts of the world. A really large percentage of London's population was not born in London or in Britain. For them, it's not actually anti-Semitic to say that Jews might have an affinity to Israel equal to or greater than that they have to Britain, because they're from all parts of the world, and they see it through their own way of life and their own cultural experience and background, not through some kind of anti-Semitic prejudice. So we take some of these findings in a certain way, and we say, oh, that's anti-Semitic. But actually, it doesn't mean that the people are saying those things because they are anti-Semitic. You've got to be really careful with this stuff. It's really serious business.
Where does the CST see the main threat, if any, to the Jewish community in Britain coming from at the moment?
There's no doubt that the main threat is jihadi terrorism. If we suffered terrorist attacks, God forbid, like occurred in Paris and like occurred in Toulouse at the Jewish primary school, then the levels of communal fear and concern about future in the UK would be so much greater than they currently are. Terrorist attacks like those really are a very, very serious matter for any individual Jewish community. Then on top of that, of course, you have all of the anti-Semitic race hate incidents, and you also have the anti-Israel stuff. Now, I think for every individual, they have a different feeling as to when the anti-Israel stuff becomes actually anti-Semitic. But when the anti-Israel stuff manifests itself as basically intimidation against anything remotely Israeli, whether it's a shop or a dance troupe at your local synagogue, then I think, again, you get into territory where people get really uptight about it. Whether by definition in law or in philosophical terms it's actually anti-Semitic or not, it doesn't really matter. People get really, really uptight by it. So there's the anti-Semitic race hate attacks element is very important when things increase significantly at times of tension, especially in the Middle East. And then also I think the anti-Israel stuff has a role to play as well.
Well, after the next piece of music, we're going to be talking to Rabbi Arnold Saunders, who will be talking about his own experiences of anti-Semitism and also, of course, his involvement with the campaign against anti-Semitism. I'll let you go in a moment, Mark Gardner, but we've also got later in the programme, on a lighter note, we're talking to Irv Lamb about the Jewish community of Glasgow and Scotland. So are you going to be celebrating Burns Night this year, Mark Gardner?
We celebrate it every year. We have Glaswegian Jewish exiles Burns Night. There's no security at it. It's held in people's houses. It's invitation only.
Oh, I see.
We have a great time.
Well, if you stay listening, folks, you'll be hearing about the official Jewish tartan. I hope you've got a kilt, Mark Gardner. Thanks for joining us tonight. You have to keep smiling, don't you? All the best, and well done on all the work that CST does.
Always good talking to you guys. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark. Bye-bye.